it is an absolute bombshell in the Formula 1 world. I literally just woke up because I had to stay up almost all night to watch the race and was bombed with lots of notifications saying that the McLarens were both disqualified from the race in Las Vegas. That means that Verstappen won and none of the McLaren scored any points. He is now tied with Piastri in second place and 24 points away from Lando. Absolute cinema. I even had planned to release the video for the qualifying first because I was already working on it, but that has to wait. This is just too big of an event. This could shake up the whole Formula 1 championship in the last few races of the season, and I have no words for it right now. But why were the McLarens disqualified, you ask? Well, if you haven't seen it already, the McLarens were disqualified by the same reason lots of other drivers have been disqualified over the last few years. And it's because of the plank wear. There is a rule saying that the plank wear cannot be lower than 9mm, and during the race, honestly, Piastri was sparking a lot. I don't know how I did not think of this possibility when I saw the race, but now that the results came out, I'm not even shocked by Piastri, but I'm a little bit shocked by Lando because I didn't see so many sparks on him. And the technical document released by the FIA was very clear on these measurements. Lando got a measure of 8.88mm in the front and 8.93mm in the back, while Piastri got around 8.96mm on the left and 8.74mm on the right or for the front, and the rear got 8.9mm, all of them below the threshold of 9mm. And if you take a look at every time this has happened in Formula 1, for example with Leclerc it happened a few times, with Hamilton too, with the Mercedes it has happened before I think too, and all of those times the penalty was the same: disqualification from the race. And the implications on the championship are huge, especially taking into account all the context behind this race. Lando made a very solid race. He didn't have to win it. He doesn't have to win any race right now. He just has to finish second and look pretty to take the championship home. But today it was not so easy. He had to nurse home a very huge problem that cost him a lot of lap time in the end of the race. And these kind of races where you can salvage a huge problem like this, it's what can make or break a championship. And this time around he saved it just to be disqualified right after. With just 2 races to go and 1 sprint, Max is now 24 points within the lead. And if Piastri has a shot at the win of the championship, Max does too, and it's completely championship back on for both. If Lando has a bad race and a bad result, it's absolutely possible for each of them to be fighting for the championship, and it will be an absolute disaster for the McLarens if they actually lose the championship to Max. In Brazil, for example, everyone was doubting Max because he qualified so poorly, but then in the race he just made an absolute masterclass and came back to the podium, and now he's back in contention because it just looks like he can win or get on the podium in every race. If he's able to beat Lando comprehensively, if Lando or Piastri have a little more bad results, he's going to be there to capitalize on it. And today was a commanding performance by Max, an absolutely dominant race. He dominated the first stint, the second stint, he did everything right. And although at times Lando was able to push towards Max, the problem was that the McLaren couldn't keep that race pace for long, so Max just won by consistency. Despite this, for me, the driver of the day was 100% Kimi Antonelli. He made such a good race today that I was really impressed by. After the McLaren disqualification, he now finishes P3. He started P17, he gained 14 positions. It was an absolutely amazing race, and of course he was helped by the disqualification, but may I remind you that he did only 1 pit stop at the very beginning of the race, and he went from the softs to the hards, and he basically carried the hards for the whole duration of the race. And that is amazing by itself. The tire preservation was incredible. The pace in very old hard tires was completely amazing. It's not at all an overstatement to say that it was his best race in Formula 1 so far. This makes it a double podium for Mercedes, as Antonelli crucially got in front of Leclerc after the 5-second penalty just by 0.2 of a second. And also with the McLaren disqualification, the top 10 changed a little bit, with now Behrman and Ocon scoring points. But enough of chit-chatting around, I want to go into some very cool stuff that happened into the race, so let's do it right now. Verstappen was fastest, followed by Antonelli and then Norris, that probably had his average ruined by the last few laps. But the ones that impressed me the most this race were Leclerc and Hamilton, because they had such a poor qualifying. They had to put more downforce into the car to try and have a better wet qualifying, but it failed miserably and they were terrible in there. But in the race they had very solid pace, on par with the Mercedes, and they got a very good position for it. With the disqualification of the McLarens, Leclerc barely missed out on a podium and Hamilton got P8, which, starting from last position, it's at least points. And after an amazing qualifying for Sainz, it was a shame that he couldn't keep up the pace. The Williams was not able to produce the race pace to keep P3, but he was comfortably best of the rest, and that's where he finished. And the heat map reflects today's results really well. If you take a look at the speeds, Leclerc was one of the fastest, as well as the Mercedes. Verstappen wasn't, because of course he didn't get any kind of DRS during the race. Norris were neither, and Piastri was not too. And that's to be expected. The McLaren is always a little bit draggy. I've said this before, I never expect them to have great top speed, and this time around it was the same. Piastri couldn't make a dent when he had DRS. He was very draggy, contrary to Leclerc, who we saw making lots of overtakes using DRS. The first two sectors were dominated by Max, but the last sector was Hamilton, incredibly, but very close with Antonelli. Norris of course had solid pace, especially in sector 2, but once again the last few laps might have affected these averages. And in the end it was not enough to rival with the race pace of Antonelli, which was one of the best, and we're going to get into his race right now. I cropped the graphic after the last safety car, and let's keep in mind that Antonelli pitted on lap 2. Take a close look from lap 27 onwards. Antonelli just keeps gaining time as fuel keeps coming out of the car, but by the time we get to lap 27, his tires are already 25 laps old. Most of the drivers we've seen made a pit stop around this time, and that's precisely around the time where he kept gaining time non-stop. Until then he was kind of steady, but after that he gained a lot. Of course Lando and Max were quicker with fresher tires, but that was not the case from lap 47-48 onwards, where Antonelli was lapping just like Verstappen and much quicker than Norris, as he got that problem. And it's completely insane to think that at that time his tires were like 45 laps old. That was just insane. He finished the race just a little bit slower than Max, but pretty much on pace with him. That's, I won't say unheard of, but pretty rare. A superb performance in this race for Antonelli, with a 5-second time penalty for that false start that was barely noticeable for anyone. And he was not the only Mercedes having a good day. Russell enjoyed a very good race, finishing P2, making it a double podium, while carrying some kind of issue that they were talking about during the race. Starting P3, he jumped Norris in a very opportunistic move when Norris tried to defend from Max, and got P2 for most of the race, but ended up being overtaken by Lando once again because his race pace was just that good. But by the end of the race, Lando dropped the pace tremendously, and Russell had a shot at overtaking him on track. And you can see in the delta graphic that basically in lap 45, his delta to Lando was around 13 seconds. By the time the race ended, that gap was around 4. At the pace they were going, 2 more laps would be enough for him to overtake Lando on track, because the problem on Lando's side was that huge. On the press conference, Lando just said that he had to manage his pace a little bit because he was told by the team that he had the problem, but this was not managing. This was a pure catastrophe that, if it had happened earlier in the race, it would have been probably a DNF, because that pace was worse than anyone on track. And I've watched a lot of the onboard and I tried to hear as much as I could of the radio, but I still didn't find a valid reason. So I'm starting to think that maybe McLaren somehow noticed the plank wearers being too much and then tried to avoid it in the last few laps. And the reason I say this is simply because Joseph was telling Lando to lift and coast in specific corners, mainly turn 10.
And happy to try a lift in 10.
I think also turn 11 and turn 12 was also one of the ones that he was telling him to do it in.
You happy with everything? It forwards.
Lando will still do overtake into 14. We can do an earlier lift into 17, bigger lift into 11. Happy to lose 2 seconds in the 3 laps remaining.
Corners 10, 11 and 12 are two fast corners followed by a huge braking zone. And in that part of the track, the load on the car is very big because the medium to high speed corners tends to get a lot of loads in the car, so it is closer to the ground, and then for the braking zone the car also lowers, so that might be one of the reasons. One other corner that he was lifting a lot in was the last corner, like turn 14, and that's also a very big braking zone in the biggest straight of the circuit, and he also had to lift early there, so maybe under bigger loads he had to lift to try and avoid this plank wear, but it was not enough if that was the reason. Take a look here in the graphic of the telemetry from Lando Norris, lap 40 versus lap 47. He's using the brakes just as usual, he's not braking earlier or later, he's more or less doing the same thing in lap 40 and 47, but the huge difference is the throttle map, and that makes a huge impact on his lap time. He's having to lift mid-straight before turn 10 and 11. And then he's doing the same thing in turn 14. So this leads me to believe that the brakes are not the problem, the throttle somehow is, and not the throttle specifically, but perhaps the loads that high speeds and high speed corners make on the car. So if McLaren knew this, wouldn't they tell Piastri? I don't know, I can't answer you that. This is my hypothesis and it could be completely wrong, but from what I see in the telemetry, I don't see any reason to believe that this was a braking problem. And I also don't believe it to be a fuel problem, since we've had two virtual safety cars that would have meant a lot of fuel saving for them in those laps. So yeah, I really don't know. Tell me down below what you think of this and perhaps we can reach a good conclusion. So that's all for today. I promise I didn't forget about the video for the qualifying, but this one just had to be made. If you have any kind of analysis that you think I forgot or that you would like to see personally, just leave it down below and I'll see what I can do about it. Also, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you on the next one.